For joining us. My name is Rich Chapman. I'm Mayor Wheeler's interim communications director, and we appreciate you guys all joining us. Just one last round here before we get started. I want to make sure all of our media partners have the ability to record, so you can confirm that now. And if you have any problems with that, you've got about 30 seconds for you guys to raise your hand and we'll get that fixed. We also want to ask that you guys keep your mute on for the duration of the press conference until we reach the question and answer portion. At that time, we'll ask you to raise your hand. We'll call upon you, and you can unmute and ask your question. So it doesn't look like we've got any hands raised. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Today, we're going to have a few different speakers for you. Julie has listed the names and spelling along with the title of each of those speakers in the chat. But we'll start off with our Mayor, Ted Wheeler.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you all for being here today. This was a deadly, difficult, and disturbing weekend for our city. I want to note with deep sadness the injuries and the terrible loss of life the collective Portland family has endured. I'm grieving along with those who've been impacted by this weekend's events. I also want to convey my steadfast and my urgent determination to find those who are responsible and bring them to justice to end this cycle of violence. We created the Enhanced Community Safety Team, a group of select on-call officers that provide a rapid response to gun violence. We also assembled the Focus Intervention Team, which is now actively investigating gun-related crimes. This newly assembled team is our best defense at preventing and investigating gun violence from a law enforcement perspective, and that goes alongside significant investments we've made in the community through our Office of Violence Prevention. We funded the expansion of 311 to reduce 911 wait call times. And this directs non-emergency calls away from 911 so that police officers can focus on emergencies like these. We'll fund an expanded Portland Street response and public safety specialists to make sure that we're sending the right help to the right call. We're actively working to recruit and retain our best officers to better protect Portlanders. And I've set a goal to hire 300 police staff over the next 3 years to get closer to minimum staffing levels for the Portland Police Bureau. My administration will continue to lead and prioritize public safety, and we're not going to stop until peace returns to Portland. Our purpose for this press conference this morning is fourfold. First, we'll provide a summary of what we know and what we can discuss regarding all three shooting incidents this weekend. Second of all, we'll ask that all Portlanders help our investigators get these dangerous people off our streets. A safer city is a city where our community works together to prevent violence. Third, what the Police Bureau and what our law enforcement partners are doing in the days ahead to help achieve a ceasefire. And fourth, we'll hear from our acting Oregon U.S. Attorney, who will announce an expanded and coordinated partnership with federal agencies to bring Portland's gun murders to an end, to bring justice to those who've helped perpetrate them, to use the powers of federal laws, federal prosecutors, and federal courts, as well as federal prisons, to bring them to bear to help us address this issue. I want to thank my colleagues at the Portland Police Bureau, the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, the Oregon State Patrol, the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, and the FBI for recognizing the urgency and agreeing to meet with me this morning. I also want to thank the Office of Violence Prevention and our local community-based organizations who've been working firsthand on these issues over the weekend and well beyond. And with that introduction, now I'd like to invite Portland Police Chief Chuck Lavelle, who will provide an update on information regarding the recent shootings in Portland. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, everybody. Again, thanks to everyone for being here today. This was probably one of the most deadly and challenging weekends our city has experienced. It's also one of the most heartbreaking. People are dead, people injured, lives destroyed over senseless violence. Right now, the level of gun violence, the increasing homicides is wearing on the community, as well as our officers, supervisors, and investigators. We had 3 major incidents this weekend we're going to discuss today. I'd like to note that we had the same on-call team responding to all 3 of these to investigate as well. I want to take a moment to thank the men and women of the Police Bureau, the officers, sergeants, criminalists, detectives, supervisors, all the support personnel in the PIO's office, everyone who responded to the tragedies and continues to work every day, work hard to serve the city. So I'll do a short recap of the incident so we're all on the same page. The first incident we'll discuss is the officer-involved shooting that occurred in the 900 block of Broadway Drive. It began with a suspicious disturbance call at around 6:42 p.m. on Saturday. En route to this call, officers were informed that shots were fired. Officers instructed residents in an apartment building to shelter in place. And 8:33 p.m., an officer-involved shooting occurred. The shelter in place was then lifted and an investigation began. We have a thorough and exhaustive process to investigate any officer-involved shooting, and we're working through that process now. We've identified the officers involved, and it's up to the medical examiner to release the name of the deceased after families notified. The district attorney is in charge of these investigations, as he will bring it to the grand jury. We understand our community wants transparency and know more about what occurred. However, we must ensure that we gather all the evidence, conduct all the interviews, and protect the investigative process. The second incident was occurring at the same time on Saturday evening, and we're dividing our resources in order to respond to both of these scenes. Officers were dispatched to a shooting incident at 55 and Hasselo, Northeast. It's near Normandale Park, and this was around 8 p.m. This was a very challenging and dangerous scene for many tactical reasons. Obviously, responding officers didn't know who the shooters were, how many, where they were at, and other details. Officers had to separate those present who were providing medical assistance while also trying to move other people out of the crime scene so evidence was not compromised. Many witnesses were uncooperative, and unfortunately, someone chose to take critical evidence from that scene. Officers were able to secure the scene and get the victims additional medical assistance. We ultimately found 1 person deceased and 5 injured and determined it was a confrontation between an armed resident of the area and armed protesters. We've released the name of the armed resident this morning, as well as an appeal to bring back the evidence that was taken. Our investigators continue to work this case, but once again, the district attorney's office is in charge of the investigation. And the third incident occurred at the 128 in Southeast Foster on Sunday evening around 10:30. Officers were dispatched to a shooting of people in a vehicle. They found a woman deceased, a man critically injured, a 1-year-old shot in the leg, and a 5-year-old shot in the arm. Little kids injured by gunfire is especially heartbreaking to me and to everyone, I'm sure. Once again, this investigation is continuing, and we'll wait for the medical examiner to release the name of the deceased after families notified. And to the media, I want to acknowledge that this was a challenging weekend for you as well. We understand you have a job to do and you want answers and availability that we just couldn't provide for good reasons. We're a victim-centered and trauma-informed agency. We protect our victims and we do not identify living victims. When deaths are part of an investigation, we have a process through the medical examiner's office to determine the cause and manner of death, provide the identification and inform family members of their death. We never want to go outside this process for any reason. I understand the need for information, but our investigations don't occur at the same speed. We want witnesses to come forward and provide information that they know firsthand, not something they've read or seen on TV. We must verify their accounts and they indeed were at the scene and saw something. When we talk about protecting the integrity, that's a big part of it. So I apologize that sometimes we can't give you what you need. Moving forward, we're discussing internally and with the mayor's office and local and regional law enforcement partners, ideas to provide additional resources around gun violence. We're offering additional overtime to our focused intervention team officers and our enhanced community safety team officers and investigators, and extra overtime
It's gonna be on a different
the
loop.
presence in the area. We'd like to have a larger presence in the streets with the understanding that we know the community is suffering and unnerved by the rise in gun violence. And at this time, I think Scott Aspar, acting U.S. Attorney, will take it from here.
Thank you, Chief. I'm Scott Ospag. I'm the United States Attorney for Oregon. We've joined together too many times over the last year to talk about gun violence and the effect that it's had on our community. We've mourned the loss of lives. We've seen the funerals, and all of us are heartbroken by what's going on in our city. What I'd like to talk with you about today is what we in the federal law enforcement arena are doing to help the city of Portland and work with our local partners to reduce gun violence. In particular, my office, the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Oregon, has rededicated its efforts to focus on gun violence. We've added a specific team, a dedicated team of assistant U.S. attorneys whose sole focus is gun crimes in the metro area. And we are prosecuting more gun crimes than we have ever prosecuted before. Further, we are working closely with our federal, state, and local partners to address gun violence in the metro area through what's called the Portland Area Crime Gun Initiative, or PAC-G. That group includes the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, Multnomah County Sheriff, Gresham Police Department, and many other members of the Portland area law enforcement community to look regularly, sometimes daily, at shooting investigations and work very closely with the district attorney's office to determine where cases should go for appropriate prosecution. This focused team is going to work. We are looking at cases every day. We are going to do what we have to do to reduce gun violence in the local community. The FBI and ATF, they actively support these local agencies and investigations with their forensic expertise and equipment. That includes ballistics and DNA analysis and other resources to quickly link shell casings to guns with active shooters. The quicker we can make these links, the quicker we can save lives. We further support PPB's efforts like their new focused intervention team. PPB is the backbone of our region's gun violence response, and we will continue to do everything we can to support and supplement their work. The consequences of state or federal conviction will make some people think twice before resorting to gun violence, but not all. So we also thank the mayor's office and all of his efforts to look at the deep causes and root causes of gun violence and to work in the community for the community's support to reduce gun violence. One area of community support that we must have is people willing to come forward and identify what they've seen. For us to make cases against individuals engaged in gun violence, we must have people willing to step forward on behalf of themselves, on behalf of those lost, and on behalf of the community to say what they've witnessed and let law enforcement do its job to prosecute and convict those individuals who have committed crimes in our community. In the time I have as United States Attorney for the District of Oregon, I'm going to do everything I can to work with our local partners to make sure that the federal law enforcement community in the District of Oregon is doing all it can to support the work of the Portland Police Bureau and all law enforcement here locally. And with that, I'll turn it over to Multnomah District Attorney Mike Schmidt. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everybody for getting here today. As we've said, there have been 4 shootings in the last 72 hours in our community. These shootings have spanned, they've been from the east side to the west side of our county, and we've lost 3 lives. First and foremost, my heart goes out to the family members who have lost loved ones, the community members who have lost loved ones. When a person decides to pick up a gun and use it to threaten harm and take away another person's life, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It hits all of us. And as you've heard from all of us here, we feel it deeply, as do the community members across Multnomah County. As your district attorney, I'm committed to holding perpetrators of violence accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Likewise, I'm overcome with gratitude for the people on the front lines responding to these tragedies. Police officers at the scene, the prosecutors who go out in the middle of the night to join them to help lead these investigations, and community members who are willing to come forward and assist us in investigations. I'm grateful to all of you who are helping us solve these cases. Our office has issued 16 cases related to gun violence in 2022 so far alone, with more pending review. As the U.S. Attorney said, we're prosecuting more gun violence cases than ever before. Last year, we issued 206 cases for prosecution. And if you want to track that in real time, you can go to our website at mcda.us, and we have a dashboard so you can see the cases that we're bringing. As everyone in my office worked diligently to review the facts and the evidence of each shooting, issue charges, and prosecute, we hold these truths to our hearts, that victims deserve justice and that harm cannot and will not go unaccounted for. The suspect in the Saturday's Normandale Park shooting has been identified. He's currently in critical condition, and we're working closely with PPB detectives to review the case and the facts and make a determination on charging decisions. And I'm going to leave that at that for today. So thank you for having us here today, and we're doing everything we can to work these cases. I'm going to turn it over to Special Agent in Charge, Kieran Ramsey.
Thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Again, you've heard this repeatedly from all these leaders. So a couple of things I'd like to highlight. One is the incredible partnership that we continue to have across federal, state, and local agencies. And it's not just law enforcement, it's other agencies such as Portland's Office of Violence Prevention and the like, to make sure that this is a whole of government effort so that we can do 2 things really. The first and foremost is to stop the shooting, to get this to stop. We are in unprecedented territory again this year. Whereas last year, law enforcement, especially Portland Police Bureau, continued to sound the alarm of record-breaking violence on the streets of Portland. This year, we are already on pace to easily surpass that level. So we are in a sense of urgency that can't be explained enough or reemphasized enough between federal agencies, state agencies, local agencies, and that partnership is an everyday occurrence where we try and make sure we are bringing everything we can where we can, be it technical resources, financial resources, or even investigative resources. The second piece is to bring justice to those that have already been cut down, to bring justice to those families that are suffering right now as we sit on this call, that are grieving enormously because they've lost their loved one in a situation where it is far too late and perhaps they were at the wrong place simply at the wrong time. So with that, in partnership with Oregon Crime Stoppers, the Safe Streets Task Force continues to try and offer rewards, to plead with the community to step forward. If you have information, please cooperate with law enforcement. If you're concerned about retribution or retaliation for cooperating with law enforcement, let us know. There are a lot of things that we can do, especially at the federal level, to protect your identity so that you can safely provide that information that perhaps could bring justice to those grieving families like those this weekend that have already lost loved ones and are sitting at home right now suffering enormously. So again, I'd like to thank our partners. We act with a sense of urgency every day. This is a continuing collaborative partnership. And again, I'm confident that as our efforts move forward, we will have that necessary impact, but we still need the community's cooperation. We still need the community's assistance as we come together to try and stop this violence. Thanks.
Thank you, Special Agent Ramsey, and thank you to all of our speakers for making yourself available today. At this time, we will open up for question and answer. The way we'll do it is if you use the raise your hand function, I'll call on you. We ask that you list your name for us, the agency you represent, and who your question is directed at. So with that, we'll start with Rebecca Ellis.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm with OPB. I have a question for Mayor Wheeler. So you had made a call in a press conference last April for Portlanders to take action against protesters. You said it was time to unmask them, make them hurt a little bit. Some have connected those words, which I think a lot of people saw as encouraging vigilantism, with the political violence we saw on Saturday night. So my question is, do you believe those words helped incite the violence we saw? And if so, do you regret it?
I do not believe that's the case. And Rebecca, first of all, people can be hurt in many ways. And you were there in that press conference, I believe. It was crystal clear from the context of my statement that I was not referring to or advocating violence. I was speaking to the trauma and the hurt felt by Portlanders who had been subjected once again the night before that press conference to criminal destruction and violence. And when I was referring to hurt them, I was referring to those who were engaged in criminal destruction and violence and hurting them by holding them accountable. And I was speaking to a very specific case. So again, the context was very clear in which I used that statement. If I regret anything, it's that I used a statement that could be used out of context for political gain or for purposes that it was not intended. But my objective was then, as it is now, to hold people accountable for criminal destruction and violence in our community. That's what I'm referring to. And I have now clarified this no fewer than 3 times. The record is there. People can go back and review exactly what I said during that press conference. And if people choose to use it in the media as a statement of me either referring to or advocating violence, at this point, I've explained it. I've made it clear. The record is clear. And people should understand that that is not, the context was clearly not a reference to a reference to violence.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, Mike Benner next.
Good morning, Mike Benner with KGW News here. First of all, thank you for giving us a few minutes this morning. We appreciate it. I have a couple questions, and I think these questions are more for either the police chief or DA Schmidt. First of all, can either of you speak to the motivation behind the shooter and the shooting? There's a lot out there in social media. People are starting to connect the dots. Actually, they did hours ago. Can either of you speak to the motivation? And then secondly, some are arguing that this shooting, the one at Normandale, is so high profile that information should have come out a little faster. You've spoken about the chaotic scene. There's also the condition of the suspect. Are those reasons why the information maybe is taking a little longer than other times? Thank you.
I can start and then pass it to the DA. I think for me, it doesn't make sense to speculate as to the motivations of anyone involved. I think we'll uncover some of that during the investigation. And I also think when you talk about these scenes, you have officers showing up to a scene, you don't know who's involved, where evidence may or may not be, and then there's people you want to talk to and identify. Some of those folks are not available for interviews because of circumstances surrounding the event, and that makes it difficult. And it's a situation where we want to be responsive and get as much information out there as possible. We want to make sure that that's good and accurate information and still not jeopardize any investigation that's going on at the same time. So I think it's all those factors that made it difficult to put out information. And we have these events going on at the same time. So we split our resources for investigators too. So we have additional time needed to still do some investigation as well with half the team we normally would. So I think all those are really factors. If there's anything else that the DA wants to add, I'll pass it off to him.
No, Chief, you covered it. Things like motivation, other things, we let the evidence develop as we work the investigations. We don't want to get anything wrong, obviously. And so really our job is to make sure that we're working with detectives to put together the case. That's what our focus is, so that we make sure that whoever the responsible person can be held accountable. And so that's how we prioritize things. As the chief acknowledged in his opening statements, that doesn't always move as fast as the speed of information. And we recognize that and how that can cause frustration. But first and foremost, our biggest responsibility is to build a case and make sure that those who cause harm are held accountable. That's what our focus is.
All right, Lindsay, you're next.
Thank you. I have two questions if I could. The first one, probably for the mayor. Yesterday, I had to go out of that apartment building and talk to people who live in the same building as the mom and 1-year-old and 5-year-old that were shot in the car. A lot of people are scared. They want answers. They want accountability. A lot of people are talking about now leaving Portland because they don't feel safe. I've certainly seen other people do that. And they want to know where the leadership is because they feel like they're not getting it. And I'm not just talking about this one incident. It's a long list of incidents. And every time people are asking, where's the leadership in this?
Thank you for the question. Let me dial this back just a little bit and say, all of these shootings are obviously horrific, and they are all tragic, and they all profoundly impact families and loved ones. It also traumatizes the entire community. As a father, I was particularly struck by what happened this weekend with 2 small children being shot. I don't know how anyone in this community could hear about or read about, or in some cases personally experience the kind of horrific violence we've seen this weekend and feel anything other than utter despair and a profound sense of sadness. But for me, what this does is it motivates me, and it underscores the importance of the direction and the investments that my administration has been making since this epidemic of gun violence started. And I want to remind people that some of the investments that we took as an administration, we did so against opposition from some of my own colleagues on the Portland City Council, opposition from people in the community, opposition from the press. When we proposed the enhanced community safety team, we had to investigate gun violence. The chief had to cobble together resources internally from the Portland Police Bureau. In other words, take resources out of other types of activities so that we could focus on gun violence. When we proposed the focus intervention team, which is now out on the street, seeking to prevent and intervene in cases of gun violence, there was only one vote on the Portland City Council in favor of funding that team. That vote was mine. We also made significant investments in community organizations that work directly with those who are impacted. I appreciate that you took the time to go out and meet with members of the family. That is a really important act of humanity, as well as I know you're trying to discover the truth and understand what happened. But Nike Green, who's on this call, who's the director of the Mayor's Office of Violence Prevention, her team has also been reaching out to those who've been directly impacted, including that family, to offer them whatever support or services they need, or just to offer a shoulder to cry on during a very difficult time. We're going to continue to make further investments. And again, they will be controversial. People will fight me tooth and nail as I try to invest in resources to improve public safety. I will continue to work with all of my partners who are here on this call to develop new collaborations and improve communications and better ways to work together so that we can wrap our arms collectively around this gun violence. That's the kind of leadership that I am providing. It's the kind of leadership I will continue to provide. And this weekend underscores the importance of collaboration. We have to work together to get past this epidemic of gun violence. And I am 100% committed as the mayor of this city to aggressively pursuing justice.
Thank you. Do we have time for me to ask one more?
Sure.
Okay.
I got time.
Okay, lastly, so with the Normandale Park shooting and others that we've seen, we hear, a lot of people don't come forward. And so people are wondering, you're asking a community that doesn't trust you, doesn't trust the police bureau, feels like it's been targeted by the bureau in the past to cooperate with an investigation. Do you or the bureau have a plan to access that community in order to solve these crimes?
The answer is yes. And there are people on this call who are in a better position to be able to answer that specifically. And so, Rich, I might turn that over to you to either have our federal partners or our local partners talk about some of the specific issues we discussed this morning on this very subject.
Or Mike, is that a question you guys want to address now, or? Okay.
So then I will take the lead and answer this question. I want to be very clear that incentives are offered through law enforcement agencies, but I'll give you my opinion. Our federal, our state, and our local partners are all working to build the trust they need to encourage people to come forward. You can come forward on Crime Stoppers anonymously. So we won't know who you are and nobody will know who you are, but it can still help us to solve these cases. Law enforcement will do what law enforcement can do to investigate, to follow up, to pursue leads, to conduct interviews in the community, to find people who saw or heard something or might have seen something or might have heard something. And yes, there are incentives offered to people who are willing to come forward. There are many ways that people can help this investigation in all of these shootings move forward without personal exposure. And we really need that help. Law enforcement will do what law enforcement can do. But at the end of the day, if law enforcement wasn't there on the scene, they didn't see it, hear it, they didn't talk to people in that moment, and maybe you did, or maybe you know somebody who did, that information can be the difference between cracking these cases or having them go cold.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Wright Gazaway, looks like you're up next.
Thank you, Wright Gazaway with K2. Mayor, my question is for you. Despite the shocking violence this weekend, we heard nothing from police leadership and city leaders until today. You didn't show up. Are you aware that the absence of saying something forcefully, aside from Twitter and statements, sends a message to people that this is acceptable?
I couldn't disagree with you more, right? Law enforcement has been engaged in this throughout the weekend. They've been pursuing leads. They've been on the scene. My administration has literally been working 24/7 since this started.
Mayor, I'm not saying no one's working. I'm saying you're not communicating that with the public.
Here we are with everybody back. We are communicating. We agreed to hold this press conference to share what we know today. And that's what we're doing.
You don't think it could have been quicker? Saturday
No,
night?
no, I would rather we be accurate and provide good, solid information to the community with the benefit of collaboration with our law enforcement partners rather than winging it. This is a very critical issue. We did issue a brief statement as these events unfolded with very limited information that was available to us. The most important message I wanted to convey early on was empathy for those who were impacted directly by the gun violence, the families, the victims, others in the community who were there and were directly exposed to this violence, but we had very few details early on. It's important that we provide accurate information to the public as quickly as we can. And that's the spirit in which this press conference is taking place.
I'm not talking about information. Most of Portland is not on Twitter. I'm talking about sending a message to Portlanders that this is not acceptable and that we will do what we can to prevent it in the immediate aftermath of this happening instead of 2 or 3 days later.
Well, I disagree with your characterization that we did nothing or that we haven't been present. I believe we have. And so we can just respectfully agree to disagree on that point. This is not my first press conference on this subject. Unfortunately, this is one in a series of many press conferences I've held on the issue of gun violence in this community. I hear the anger and the frustration, and maybe more than anything else, the fear that people are expressing. And they need to know that their mayor takes this seriously, that I am prioritizing it, that I'm working with any partner who will work with me to address this issue. And that's what I've been doing all weekend, is working with people who will work with me to move towards a Portland where people don't have to look over their backs anymore.
Thank you for your question, Ryan.
Yeah.
John, you're up next.
Sorry.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
This is John with Full Rev Media. Questions directed at the Portland Police and Ted Wheeler. I have a few questions, but I think I'll just focus on one. The statement around making accurate statements is concerning, as that the statements that were made were not accurate, such as calling the mass shooter a homeowner, making claims that he has no political affiliation, when many researchers have found that he does have deep political affiliations and motivations, and has made threats about killing Black Lives Matter protesters in the past. So I'm a little bit concerned about that statement, as it doesn't seem like a lot of the information that's out there is actually accurate that's coming from the Portland Police. But I want to focus on the statement that was made about evidence being removed from the scene. I'm a little bit concerned about where this is coming from. What evidence do we have that something was removed? What do we believe was removed? So that's my question.
So I'll let somebody else deal with the law enforcement piece of this. But you're basically proving my point with regard to information. It's the community needs to hear quickly, but they also need to hear accurate information. And I'm very cognizant of that. And that's the difficult balancing act, is providing rapid information in a time when people go to Twitter to get their information, and balancing that against the very, very important need to get it right and have the information that goes out into the community be right the first time. And I'll let somebody else answer the question about evidence.
Yeah, I can take the one about evidence, and I won't get into specific pieces of evidence, other than we believe that there were some items that were removed from the scene. And if you removed any items or have any items that were at the scene that don't belong to you, we want those back. We want to ensure that we're doing a thorough investigation. We want to get justice for victims, and need evidence, and we need secure scene and all those things to make that happen. And we rely on people who are at scenes and witnesses to things to be participants, but at a minimum, don't be obstructive to the investigative process.
What is this just speculation, or like where are you getting the information that you believe something was removed? Did you see somebody remove something? You guys have video footage from GoPro from protesters, and you have video footage from the Oregon Catholic Press building. Is it coming from those videos? Like, where are you getting this information, or is it just speculation?
We do have video from the scene, I will say that, but I won't say specifically where it's coming from. But I will say that that is what we have at this time, and we'd like to get that evidence back.
So so you believe the evidence is video evidence that has been removed from the scene?
No, I didn't say that. I said we have video from the scene. I'm not saying that evidence that was removed was video evidence.
But can you expand on why you believe evidence was removed?
No, I don't think that that's in the best interest of the investigation or the case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question, John. We're going to move on to our next journalist. Maxine, you're up next.
Thank you. My question is for Multnomah County and the federal law enforcement, whether you're investigating the Normandale Park shooting as a hate crime. And the other question I have is the shooting of the family in the car on Southeast Foster. Do police believe they were the intended target or not?
This is Scott Ospavik. I can answer the first question. The FBI is working collaboratively with the Portland Police Bureau to investigate the crime at Normandale Park. And if evidence is developed that any federal crimes were committed there, the United States Attorney's Office will make the decision whether federal charges should be brought. Thank you.
And Chief, can you talk about the shooting at Southeast Foster, whether the woman who was killed and the 2 children and the other man in the car, do you believe they were the intended targets of that shooting or not?
I don't have enough information to say either way they were or weren't. We're looking into that. Hope to determine that during the course of the investigation.
Okay, and my last question, the other man who was originally arrested after the night of the Normandale Park shooting and then released, can you explain the reasoning behind that?
Which person are you referring to?
There was a man accused of initially who turned over a rifle at the scene of the Normandale Park shooting and taken into custody and then released.
Yeah, I would just say in that case, the evidence and information was the driver for that decision.
Thank you for your question, Maxine. And I just want to remind everyone, we have a limited amount of time. We'll be ending at 11:30, so please limit your questions to just one. We can at least get through all of our journalists today. Alex, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. Maxine actually had one of my questions, but I had another one specifically for the mayor. I'm curious if you've spoken with any of the victims of any of the shootings this past weekend or their families, and what that has been like for you.
Not at this point. I have not. And I want to respect the family's privacy in these early hours. I often do meet with the families or others who are impacted. I leave that up to them as to whether or not they would like to have that opportunity with me, and I'm certainly available in this case.
Thank you, Alex. Tess, you're next.
Hey, thanks. My question is for the DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm wondering, what do you believe is the root cause behind this epidemic of shootings in Portland? And also, do you believe that we can prosecute our way out of this problem?
Thanks, Tess. I'll jump in and turn it over to Scott. I think obviously across the country, we've seen an epidemic of gun violence. In some places that has gone down, has started to go back down in the right direction. We're not there yet in Multnomah County, unfortunately. I've talked to some of my colleagues, district attorneys across the country, both district attorneys who you could consider as being, more progressive and more conservative. All of us have experienced this big increase in gun violence. And some of the things that I've heard in communities where it's receded is that the infrastructure was already in place with community groups that do violence intervention work, who are already on the ground. They had that kind of scaffolding ready to go. So when their community absorbed the uptick in violence, they were ready to mobilize. I think that seems to be one thing that I know we're working on. The mayor's office has been working on for some time, but getting those resources out there as fast as possible, I think certainly is a protective factor that we've seen be effective in some communities. Scott?
Following up on DA Schmidt's comments, Tess, I believe also that, there's no question that the pandemic has had an effect, the isolating nature of it that has made law enforcement more difficult. But to answer your more pointed question is, can we prosecute our way out of it? The answer, of course, is no. That's why I appreciate the work that the mayor's office is currently doing, and as well as community groups. But the reality is, if you pull a trigger and you kill somebody, either Mr. Schmidt's office or my office are going to come look for you. Because once the trigger is pulled, those social and community groups no longer play a role. The criminal justice system plays a role. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tess. Connor, you're next.
Hi there. This question is for the mayor. I know when Lindsay asked a question about what you're doing to, help the gun violence problem in the city, you mentioned how there's some sort of resistance from the city council. So we're here again, talking about all these efforts, but how are you getting city commissioners involved to, back your efforts to curb gun violence in our city?
So I want to be clear. I believe that this city council is unified to a person in our commitment to address gun violence in Portland. I don't think there is any resistance at this point. I was referring to the steps I took last year and earlier to put the infrastructure in place for the focused intervention team and some of the other efforts that we've been engaged in. I was getting some pushback. And this was certainly prior to last summer, where I held a press conference and I said, we expect this summer to be a violent summer. And unfortunately, it was even more violent than I could have expected. But the council is now unified, I believe, and we're working on a host of issues. Commissioners Hardesty and Rubio put forth a very aggressive package, and I think Commissioner Ryan also helped lead a very aggressive package of support for community-based organizations that engage directly with people who are impacted by gun violence to help break the cycle of violence. Commissioner Maps put forward and continues to advocate for a very, very important set of reforms to our 911 system and our 311 system. I strongly support his efforts on that front. And ultimately, the council came together to support the focused intervention team community oversight group, which makes it unique amongst initiatives like this nationally, and that we have community members who are working alongside the Portland Police Bureau to make sure that we're hiring good people, that we're training them well, that we have the right policies in place that can make the biggest impact in reducing gun violence in the community. I believe this council is 100% unified on the need to act with urgency and to put into place measures that will be successful. They support the efforts that I'm undertaking to collaborate with the district attorney and our federal government and our state and local law enforcement partners in the area. So that, from my perspective, is where we are today. We're unified in our desire to reduce gun violence in Portland.
All right, thank you. And just one quick follow-up. I know there's all these programs that are being invested with PPB and throughout the commissioners, but when will Portlanders expect a change? I know these programs take a while to roll out and to show an impact. So from your perspective, should Portlanders expect more violence on the streets, in the coming weeks?
That's a tough question for me to answer. And I'm not sure anybody has the answer, but I can say definitively, if we can hold accountable those who are responsible for this kind of gun violence in our community, that will certainly reduce the number of shootings that we see in the community. If we can support families to help families be stronger, in our community through some of the interventions that we're doing through the Office of Violence Prevention and some of our nonprofit community partners. That will certainly, I think, have an impact. If we can think broader about this being not just a public safety issue after the fact, but being an issue about the health of our community, making sure kids have access to education, economic opportunities, that families have the support they need to be strong and successful. If we as a society can work with young men in particular, but not exclusively, to understand that if you have a conflict with somebody, there are other ways to resolve it than by picking up a gun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. We're going to go a little bit out of order here to capture people who are asking their first question. I'd like to remind the group, please just limit yourself to one question this time. Lisa Balick, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for the chief. Good morning, first of all. Chief, if no one's willing to talk or provide evidence in the Normandale shooting, you know, they believe they don't have any incentive to do that, where do you go with your investigation?
That's a great question. And hello to you, Lisa. Good to see you virtually. It makes investigations tough. We've had this problem for a long time. A lot of law enforcement agencies have. And I think some of it really is a matter of trust and relationship. We have had gun violence in Portland before. You know, I think back to some of the approaches in the 90s around community policing, and there were very similar issues. But at that time, community was willing to join hands with law enforcement. We walked parks together. We had meetings at Northeast Precinct. Granted, it was before my time, but some of the real community policing approaches that were born in Portland were really based around the community coming forward and saying, hey, we're tired of this violence in our community. We're tired of people getting shot. We're tired of drug dealing. We're tired of what's taken place, and we want to partner with you to make it better. And I think it's really in the best interest of community and neighborhoods. These things don't take place in a vacuum. They spread. The person who's a witness of something horrible that happens in their neighborhood one day could be the victim of something that happens horrible in their community the next. So it's really incumbent on us as a police department to build trust, open up pathways for that communication to take place. When I talked about the FIT team and their start last month, you know, a lot of it is that building of relationships and easing into that work and building that trust and having that open line of communication with the people that you're encountering on the streets.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Jonathan Levinson, you're next.
Thanks, Chief. I had a question about Benjamin Smith's brother told me that he has tried multiple times to get in touch with the detectives on the case and has not received a call back. Can you explain a little bit maybe how that's possible given multiple press releases from the Bureau stressing how eager detectives are for people to contact them?
Yeah, and we definitely would like to talk to him or anyone else who has information. I would tell you, as I said before in my statements, we have one team that was on call this weekend. They've been up for probably up to 30 hours straight at some points during the weekend. And just to give you just some context of the interest that, you know, these events have garnered, we've had over 225 inquiries from media and others about these cases and about the weekend, with, you know, one PIO trying to sift through those. So we've got a finite amount of investigators who are extremely busy and stretched thin, but we want to absolutely make sure, and I will make sure that we get in touch with the brother. But like I said in my opening statement, this has been just a busy weekend for our investigators, for a lot of you, people at the DA's office and everyone who's involved in investigating these crimes. So I think that probably has a lot to do with it. But again, we're definitely interested in making contact with him.
Thank you, Jonathan. Sergio, you're next.
Hey there, Sergio, almost New York Times. This is for the police chief. Can you say if the suspect Ben Smith was shot by a protester? You described it as a conflict between a neighbor and armed protesters. Can you say how he was injured?
Yeah, he was shot. I would say that much. And we do have that information that he was shot.
Just a quick follow-up. So are you saying that there was conflict, that both of them, like they shot each other? Like, can you describe, because you said armed protesters, so can you just go to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I don't think it's probably best for me to get into any details about that other than he was shot at the scene.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Sergio. Mike Benner, you're next.
Yeah, thanks again for an opportunity to ask a question. This one's for the chief as well. I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to this. There's a lot being made of the word homeowner that was used right out of the gate after this happened by the Bureau, that maybe the Bureau was trying to paint a specific picture, of someone trying to defend their home instead of being the actual aggressor. Do you want to comment on that? Again, a lot of people thinking that was a blatant, use of that word by the Bureau.
Yeah, to that I'll say I don't know specifically where that information has come from, but I think a lot of times in these cases, you get information and you go through your investigative process, you interview people, you get other information, and you realize that, oh, this was, maybe something different. I think I've heard the word homeowner, area resident, and I think sometimes the semantics can be, words are important, but sometimes the semantics can trip us up a little bit. But I think it was nothing intentional on the part of the Bureau. I think maybe that information had come from someone, maybe learned later that wasn't a homeowner per se, but a resident or something to that nature. But I think that really goes to show the importance of gathering accurate information, putting out accurate information. You get information initially in a lot of these cases, and then you vet it, talk to other people, get other evidence, and learn that it might be different than you originally received.
Thank you. Right, Gasaway, you're next.
Thanks. My question is for the mayor again. Mayor, given the gun violence epidemic has not slowed down over the last couple of years, the money approved last April was one-time money. Will you and City Council do more in the upcoming budget session to make these community investments longer? Are there any plans to do more?
Yes, I'm working on the law enforcement side with the chief and others, as well as on the community side with Nike and the Office of Violence Prevention. But the answer is yes. Again, our council is unified around the urgency and the importance of addressing this issue. And I appreciate the question, right? Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ray. John, you're up next.
Yeah, this is John again. So my second question is, why was the identity of Ben Smith withheld until this morning? What was the reasoning behind that? And I guess that'd be directed at the Portland Police or Wheeler.
To be clear, I have nothing to do with the investigation, so I can't answer that question for you.
We work closely with our detectives and our DAs, district attorneys, to determine when we release information. And there's also parts of the case too that are very important for us to complete and vet before we put information out. I think those are really critical pieces of it. I don't know if the DA has any specific things he wants to add, but we're very mindful of when we put out information. It takes some time to verify things, identities, and pieces of the case that are very critical before we put out names.
Okay. We'll move on to Maxine.
Yes, thanks. There have been some social media allegations that people have made complaints to Portland Police and the FBI about violent threats that have come from the suspect in the Normandale Park shooting, Ben Smith. And I wondered if he had been under investigation in the past by Portland Police or the FBI.
Hey, Maxine, can you clarify who your question's directed to?
Both Portland Police and the FBI.
I'll go first and just reiterate what U.S. Attorney Asphalt already said, and that is that we are trying to work collaboratively with the Portland Police to know or to determine what we know about the individuals involved in that incident. Obviously, it's extremely troubling. And back to our discussion that happened before, we want to make sure we get it accurate and right before we share anything further.
Thank you, Maxine. Jonathan, you're up.
Thank you. This question is for the mayor. You want to go back to something you said about the way information is released. You said, you acknowledge us coming out on Twitter and stress the importance of accurate information getting out. In this case, the furry community identified the shooter before the city. I'm curious about the thought process a little, since this is a consistent problem with the city. If information is getting leaked anyway, is 3 days of essentially official silence better than the city at least addressing the information that is out there, even if it's a little sooner than you would prefer?
That's an excellent question, first of all. And that is something we weigh. I participate in many communications meetings after these events. And you have to, on one hand, address the fact that we live in a social media world and people expect their information to be nearly instantaneous. And I can just say personally, I noted that there were people who were eyewitnesses on the scene saying things on social media about what they thought they saw. But if they don't come forward to the Portland Police Bureau, or if they don't provide a statement, or if they don't call Crime Stoppers, it is social media speculation. And so the problem we run into, and there's been a couple of cases that people have asked about this morning, the question of why was the individual called a homeowner? And by calling this individual a homeowner, could that be setting up a narrative that might be prejudging what actually happened? I believe it's important for government not to speculate and jump into the social media fray without having even the basic facts of what happened from credible sources who are actually there. And I realize that creates a lot of frustration on the part of the public that has a right to know what happened and wants to know with a sense of urgency. I get that. I agree with that. But on the other hand, it's harder for government to backtrack if we get it wrong, if we provide information that later turns out to be false. And having been through this a number of times and other types of criminal cases in our community, I have seen us go out with a statement presuming we thought we knew what had happened, and later finding out that it was completely inaccurate information. And so, as frustrating it is for the public to hear this from law enforcement, it is really important for us to wait, to be patient, to make sure that we get the facts and that the facts we give to the community are as accurate as possible.
Thank you. And that's Sergio, you're up next.
Hey, I just want to follow up on Jonathan's question since you're an elected official here. You're saying you don't want information to come out. It has to be factual and it can't, everybody wants it instantaneously. But the shooting was Saturday night. It's Tuesday. There was silence with everybody asking questions. Was the suspects allowed? Was a shooter on the loose? Has anyone been detained? I mean, these are basic questions for every mass shooting. Can you speak to that? Because mass shootings are not uncommon, but it seems Portland's response, they found a way to have an uncommon response to a mass shooting.
Well, again, this is a question of, does law enforcement have accurate information to share to the public? And we're always reevaluating the need for urgency against the need to be accurate. And I'll just reiterate what I just said. While I understand that people want information now, the fact of the matter is what we could have provided that night is probably turning over Twitter feeds and saying, here's what people are saying on Twitter who say they were there. I'm not sure how us engaging in that kind of speculation in the early hours after an incident like this is helpful or productive. And ultimately, it might be misleading to the community in terms of what actually happened. I'll give you sort of a generic case. We had a generic case, a year-ish ago, where an eyewitness made a statement about what they saw at an officer-involved shooting. And that was the early information that made it into the media. The media had a source that they could source by name. And what happened was many number of days later, it turned out that there was a surveillance video that was right there that captured the entire incident on video. And it turned out that what the witness had described to the press and what had been reported to the public was completely inaccurate. When we're working with law enforcement partners at the local level, at the state level, or at the federal level, we can't afford to make mistakes like that because it could potentially harm the veracity of the case. And so if, when I look to my district attorney or I look to my federal prosecutor, the reason they're often very tight-lipped about these circumstances, or even the police chief is tight-lipped, is because we don't have the facts. We don't have the information. And our investigative unit just has to go through the dog work of talking to people, finding witnesses, finding people who may have heard something, reviewing video footage, all the kinds of things that make up a thorough investigation. And again, I realize we're just in this environment where people demand information quickly, and we're balancing that against making sure that we get our facts straight before we release them to the public. And there will always be that tension. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon.
All right, we're about 6 minutes over time as it is, and we've got a lot of people with busy schedules here that we need to let go. Those of you that still have your hands up, please email our email address we've listed in the chat, Wheeler Media requests at portlandoregon.gov with any follow-up questions you have. We appreciate you guys all coming here and participating in this. With that, we'll end it.